Coming up on DFE News, a stabbing attack on a train north of London, 11 people suffered serious injuries. Also, former Vice President Dick Cheney dead at the age of 84. And it wasn't making much news until President Trump stepped in, but Christians are being slaughtered in Nigeria. Brad Brandon of Across Nigeria joins us to explain. We've got news for you, those stories and more right now on DFE News. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on DFE News, News Done Right. I'm Jeff Kirk. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment so everyone gets to see DFE News. So much is going on. Let's get right to it. A stabbing attack on a train in England left nearly a dozen people in the hospital with life-threatening injuries. A man began stabbing passengers aboard a train Saturday evening as it was making its way toward London. The driver of the train diverted to the Huntingdon station so police could be on hand to respond to the attack. At least 11 people were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Police arrested 2 men at the scene, but later released one after they determined he was not involved. 32-year-old Anthony Williams has been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder. Authorities are saying the attack is not terrorism, but some British citizens are taking issues with that, saying if you storm a train and carry out a mass stabbing on innocent people, you're a terrorist. So far, police have not released Williams' motive. Thankfully, all those injured in the attack have survived. One of the victims, a railway worker who attempted to intervene in the attack, remains in critical but stable condition. Former Vice President Dick Cheney has died at the age of 84. His family says Cheney passed away Monday from complications from pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. He's most well known as Vice President to George W. Bush and played a very public role in the administration during the Iraq War years, often defending unpopular surveillance and interrogation tactics after the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Cheney had a long battle with heart problems, beginning with a heart attack at age 37 after being a heavy smoker for 2 decades. Cheney had multiple surgeries over the years, including a heart transplant in 2012. Cheney also served as defense chief under President George H.W. Bush and was chief of staff for President Gerald Ford. Islamic terrorists have forced as many as 15 million Christians from their homes in Nigeria since 2009 and killed between 50 and 100,000 since then. Just this year alone, more than 7,000 have been martyred for professing Christ. President Trump has stepped in to stop the killing. Brad Brandon, founder and CEO of Across Nigeria, joins us now to provide more details. And we should warn you, this is a topic that may not be appropriate for all ages. Brad, we had Troy Miller of the National Religious Broadcasters here on DFE in July, and he asked the president to make Nigeria a country of particular concern. And the president recently did just that. What were your first thoughts about that decision to intervene in the persecution of Christians in Nigeria?
Yeah, I welcome it. I know President Trump in his first term did put Nigeria on the country of particular concern list, and President Biden took Nigeria off that list, almost one of the first things he did when he became president. So to see President Trump put them back on the list, it puts diplomatic pressure on the Nigerian government because of the persecution that's happening there. It also allows us to be able to restrict aid and impose sanctions. So I welcome the idea of putting it on the country of particular concern list with the State Department.
So that's more of a precursor to being able to take more stringent action against the government or against particular groups there in Nigeria?
Yeah, they also are calling for, Ted Cruz recently introduced legislation, the Nigerian Accountability Act, which calls for putting Boko Haram and ISWA on the entities of particular concern. That allows the State Department to take action and use leverage that they otherwise wouldn't have.
So, Brad, we want to talk about just how horrible the situation there in Nigeria is. But before we do that, we want to show a video that shows how frightening life can be there for Christians in Nigeria. Again, this video does depict violence, so it may not be appropriate for children. So, Brad, is this a common scene in Nigeria nowadays?
It is. I've seen that video before, but unfortunately, that's all too common occurrence in Nigeria, and I'm too familiar with scenes just like that happening all across, mostly northern Nigeria, is where the violence is focused on right now.
Mm. So more in those areas that are controlled by groups. You mentioned Boko Haram. So is this largely a Muslim versus Christian persecution?
It is. There's a large element to all of it. Of course, it's very complex, but most of the violence is happening because of groups like Boko Haram, ISWA, and which is the Islamic State of West Africa, other terrorist groups and radical groups throughout northern Nigeria. Northern Nigeria is about 90% Muslim. Southern Nigeria is about 90% Christian. But it's groups like Boko Haram and ISWA that are causing most of the killing. There's also another complexity to it, and that is the Fulani herdsmen. Fulani are mostly Muslim. They're causing a lot of violence in those areas as well toward Christians, but a lot of that is socioeconomic and ethnic issues that's causing the violence. It's not so much jihadi radical Islam when it comes to Fulani herdsmen and Christians, although there's an element to that.
So is it more of a forcing people to convert to Islam, or is it more just a massacre?
Yeah, it's more of just a massacre. I mean, Boko Haram and ISIL will go after even Muslims that don't have hold the radical ideology that they have. They've been known to blow up mosques and even kidnap children from Islamic schools. They turn around and sell the girls into slavery. But they'll attack Muslims and Christians as well. It's disproportionately targeted at Christians, though.
Mm. Oh, that's terrible. So we've seen fairly recently, even in Europe, what happens there when those who practice Sharia law, when they start to gain influence in an area, even in a Christian-dominated area. What will happen here in the U.S. when we have a Muslim mayor in our largest city here?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, Europe really is the canary in a coal mine. If you go back to the early 1980s, there was one country in the entire world that held Sharia law as its legal system. That was Saudi Arabia. Fast forward about 20 years or so, that number went up to 16 countries. I think right now the number is 39 countries have adopted Sharia law as their legal system. So I say all of that just to say that Sharia law and radical Islam is not, it's not satisfied to assimilate into countries. It wants to dominate. We see that happening, no greater example than in Europe right now, where you have countries like the UK, Sweden, Germany, Greece, where they have in their cities what they call no-go zones. And those are areas that are controlled by Islamic rule. And even first responders aren't allowed. The police and paramedics are not allowed to go into those areas without the permission of the Islamic leaders. Those are in Western cities. That's the canary in the coal mine for what could be happening here in the United States of America. We've seen even as far back as 2009, there was a superior court judge that used an Islamic imam's ruling under Sharia law as precedent for his court. Now that decision was overturned, but it just shows the volition of Sharia law and Islamic rule to not assimilate to the country, but dominate it.
Yeah, obviously, this is a very serious topic, but recently the Babylon Bee satire site put out an article titled "Christians in Nigeria Disguise Themselves as Palestinians so people will care about them being genocided." Why do you think that Christians in Nigeria aren't getting the level of attention that other ethnic groups get?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues there. I think number one, a lot of countries in Africa don't have the economic influence globally that countries like Israel and other places do. So it doesn't quite get the attention in the news. But I also think that for Christians here in the United States, for so long, nobody was talking about this issue. We've been dealing with this issue for 10 years. The genocide in Nigeria has been going on. We've been talking about it, trying to raise attention and awareness, just hasn't seemed to get anybody's attention. I think for the church here in America, the first issue is awareness. They just simply didn't know what was going on. But now that it is making the news and is making headlines, I still get the sense that a lot of Americans are burying their head in the sand on this. The reason I think is because when you have something so horrible like a genocide happening, when you don't know what to do and you don't know what the answers are, it's much easier to bury your head in the sand and pretend like it's not happening. Because if you acknowledge that it's happening, then you have to do something about it. And that can be very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. So, Brad, President Trump recently, we mentioned, designated Nigeria as a country of concern. He also mentioned the possibility of maybe going in guns blazing if the government of Nigeria doesn't take any action. Do you think that direct military action is likely? And if so, what form do you think it might take?
Well, I think anybody who knows President Trump knows that his way is to be very bombastic and use a lot of language like that. I think he does that just to shake things up, and that's just the way he leverages what he's trying to do. I think it's highly unlikely that he would ever send in troops or do airstrikes in that region. However, if he did, I would certainly welcome that when it comes to airstrikes against groups like ISWA or Boko Haram. It seems like that's the only thing that would really stem the violence that's going on when it comes to those groups. However, I would issue a caution with that is Boko Haram and ISWA will often embed themselves in communities of innocent people. So if there were airstrikes, I would be very cautious and very concerned that there'd be quite a bit of collateral damage and innocent lives that would be lost.
So tell us a little bit more about Across Nigeria. How did you get started? How did you form the organization? Tell us how you got interested in this topic.
I was pastoring a church here in the United States for a long time, and I just became very discontented in my relationship with the Lord. I cried out to him, and God restored my relationship with him. Through that process, I ended up going to Abuja, Nigeria, and ended up contacting a community of Fulani Muslims, and we started ministering to them, sharing with them the love of Christ, bearing the fruit of the Spirit. I believe that the Bible calls the fruit of the Spirit fruit because fruit is the reproductive organ of a plant. If you cut open an apple, what's inside? There's seeds. The fruit is how the plant reproduces itself. So we as Christians are called to bear that fruit to reproduce faith in the lives of people around us. So we go into Fulani Muslim communities and we just bear the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace. And in turn, we plant the seeds of faith in their lives. We show them the love of Christ and help them with medical needs, clean drinking water. We even provide educational programs for Fulani Muslims. What's interesting is that everywhere that we've started and established a school, the violence in those areas drops by about 60 to 70%. The other part of our ministry is that we very much focus on the persecuted church. Northern Nigeria has 12 states that are controlled by Sharia law. And under Sharia law, becoming a Christian is a crime punishable by death. Mm-hmm. So we have a refugee facility that goes in and extracts people who are in harm's way, whose lives are in danger. We bring them to our refugee facility and help them to restart their lives. So those are the kind of the two focuses of Across Nigeria. One is reaching Muslims with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the other one is helping the persecuted Christians there.
Yeah, dangerous work without a doubt. Have you yourself been in situations where you thought this might be it for you? Have you faced those dangers?
Yeah, many times. It's a extremely violent area. Most of the areas that we operate in are controlled by Boko Haram and ISWA. Most of the time we find ourselves, 12, it'd be a 12-hour drive to get out of the areas that are controlled by Boko Haram. So we're in it. And if anything were to happen, there's really no one we can call for help. There's been many a times where we've had some very close calls, but God has always had his hand on us. We have had some of our pastors in our ministry killed by radical Islam in northern Nigeria. In fact, in 2021, one of our pastors was hacked to death in his bed overnight. And that was after we had finished a 2-week evangelistic tour through northern Nigeria. So I can't emphasize enough that this is an extremely violent and dangerous area of the world. In fact, northern Nigeria right now is the most dangerous place to be a Christian. Of all the Christians that were killed in the entire world last year, 70% of all of those were killed in northern Nigeria.
That's incredible. So you mentioned Boko Haram and the Islamic State, which are, we might call them transnational organizations. Do they receive any type of funding or sponsorship from state actors, or do they mainly just acquire their, let's say, their military capabilities on their own?
Well, that depends on who you ask. There's some people who think they're being supported by the Nigerian government. I've never seen any concrete evidence to that, but they're certainly receiving funds from actors overseas in Arabic countries. Not particularly from those governments, but certainly wealthy people within those countries are funding groups like Boko Haram and ISWA. They also fund themselves by kidnapping people and holding them for ransom. That's another way that they generate funds. And I should mention too that the Nigerian military is extremely ill-equipped when they come up against these groups. They're outnumbered and outgunned. I've even seen times where the Nigerian military was called to go in and secure an area, and they walked off the job because they said it's a suicide mission to go up against Boko Haram. Boko Haram is extremely sophisticated. They're not just a bunch of people living out in the desert. They use social media, they use technology, they use drones. They are very well funded, very well armed.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your message for Christians here in the United States? Why should they care about what happens across the world in Nigeria?
I think it's simply for Christians. For us, it goes back to a biblical mandate. In Hebrews 13:3, it says that we should bind ourselves to those who are suffering for the cause of Christ as though it's happening to us. Paul says, as bound with them. And that word bound is the same word that's used when it's describing the relationship between a husband and wife. It says in Romans 7 that a husband is bound to his wife and a wife is bound to her husband. It means that we bind ourselves so closely to those who are suffering for the cause and the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're so closely bound to them that it's whatever happens to them, it's as though it's happening to us. And that's a biblical mandate that we as the church have here in the West. And I always tell people this, in no other time in church history do we have what we have at our disposal. We have the funds. We're the wealthiest nation in the world. We have the resources. We have the influence on social media. Every single Christian nearly has a presence on social media. Therefore, they have an influence. They have an audience. God says, to much is given, much will be required. And the Western church of today, the modern Western church, has been given more than at any other time. Therefore, more is required of us than at any other time.
So what can we do to help out with and bind ourselves to our brethren there in Africa?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is pray. And I don't say that just saying in a polite way, I'll pray for you. I mean, we really need to be on our knees interceding on behalf of those suffering in northern Nigeria and really all of the Christians that are suffering persecution around the world. So number one is pray. Number two is raise awareness. These things are happening because they're happening under cover of darkness. we as Christians are called to bring light to the hidden things of darkness. And so by talking about it, by discussing it at church and in our prayer meetings, in our neighborhoods, at work, with our family, discussing it and talking about it and bringing light to these hidden things that are happening is another way that we can put an end to this. And the other part to that is to support groups that are supporting the persecuted church in northern Nigeria. And I'll just give a plug for Across Nigeria. That's exactly what we do. And your listeners can go to acrossnigeria.org to learn how to pray for us, to stay aware of what's going on. We send out an email update every week. And then also there's opportunities to give on our website.
Yep, absolutely. Brad, we've had that contact information on the screen, like you mentioned. So those of viewers who want to reach out, if they have additional questions, they know how to reach out and get in contact with you. That's Brad Brandon of Across Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us on DFE.
Thanks, Jeff.
Are you a UFO believer? Recent events along the U.S. coasts have both scientists and UFO enthusiasts stunned. The UFO tracking app known as Enigma, said to be the largest searchable database for global UFO sightings, recently released a report showing more than 9,000 sightings of unidentified submersible objects, or USOs, within 10 miles of U.S. shorelines or major bodies of water. Of those, 150 involve objects hovering above or entering the water without splashes, sometimes accompanied by strange lights or unexplained movements. Some of the reports detail green lights moving beneath the water, leading to speculation of whether they are natural phenomenon, or military movements, or drug smuggling activity, or something otherworldly. That's spooky. Well, perhaps not surprisingly, the U.S. states with the most sightings are California and Florida, as they each have quite a lot of shoreline as well as several Navy bases. For our last story, the bears you go see in the zoo might want to break out, so you wouldn't think a bear would want to break into the zoo. You'd be wrong. Staff at the Sequoia Park Zoo in Northern California were making their daily inspection walk when they spotted an American black bear in the zoo. But he wasn't a resident, he was a visitor. The wild black bear was interacting with the other bears through their fencing. Zoo staff said the visitor was well behaved and stayed on the boardwalk, keeping at least 2 feet on the ground at all times, and never tried to climb over any of the railings. The bear never entered any of the animal habitats, and after a little bit of coaxing, was led back into the woods outside the zoo through a service gate. He just seemed a little bit lonely. The zoo also thanked the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the local police department for their help in handling such a hairy situation. Well, that's it for now. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, comment, and engage with us so that YouTube and all the socials push it out to more viewers. If you're interested in becoming a DFE sponsor, you can click on the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen for more information. Thanks for watching DFE News, news done right. See you next time.